Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. I never thought the last time I'd hear my own name would feel like a funeral. Not because I was dying, but because the person I used to be was about to vanish forever. I remember sitting in that sterile government office, my palms sweating against the thin plastic of a chair that squeaked whenever I shifted. A man in a gray suit, too neat and too cold, leaned across the table and told me flatly, "From this point on, you don't exist. We're creating someone else. You'll have to become them. Entirely." His words didn't just land in my ears, they burrowed under my skin, coiling tight around my chest. I had agreed to testify. I had agreed to vanish. But I hadn't agreed to what came next, and yet the moment those folders slid across the table toward me, my choice ceased to matter. Inside the folder was a picture, stock photo glossy, a smiling stranger. Except, it wasn't just a stranger. It was a woman. Younger than I expected, with soft features that looked like they could have been mine if the edges of my face had been sanded down, reshaped, reborn. My throat tightened as I stared at it, the name typed beneath in blocky letters, Samantha Lee Carter. "That's not me," I said, my voice trembling but sharp. I pushed the photo away as though it burned. "You've made a mistake." I thought I'd be moved, given a new identity, but I didn't think you'd. The agent's expression never flickered. "There's no mistake. The people you're hiding from will expect us to give you a standard relocation. They'll look for a man. We make you into someone they'd never think to connect to. A complete disarmament of your old self." My old self. The words left me hollow. I gripped the table, feeling the grain of the cheap wood under my fingertips, fighting the urge to scream. I wanted to demand another option, to walk out, to cling desperately to who I was. But I also knew what waited for me outside that office. Faces in the crowd that might recognize me, shadows that carried knives, a danger that smelled like gasoline and whispered like broken glass. I swallowed hard. "You're telling me I'm supposed to live the rest of my life as her?" The agent's eyes met mine, flat and merciless. "Yes. From this moment forward, he no longer exists." And just like that, the weight of my existence, everything I thought I was, the name that felt stitched into my bones, was stripped away. The first tears stung before I could stop them. I wasn't even crying for safety or survival. I was crying because somewhere deep inside, I realized that this wasn't just a disguise. This was a transformation, one way and irreversible. And I had no idea who I'd be when it was done. The first step wasn't as cinematic as I imagined. No dramatic unveiling, no instant metamorphosis. Just a slow erosion of myself, piece by piece, under the fluorescent buzz of a hotel room the government rented for me. A mirror leaned against the wall, its surface too clean, too unforgiving. They told me to get used to looking into it because soon it would stop showing me. The stylist arrived the next morning. Not the glamorous kind you see in movies, but a brisk woman with a suitcase full of powders, brushes, and fabrics folded with military precision. Her tone was clinical, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. "You'll need to sit still. This isn't about vanity. This is about survival." I sat in that chair, stiff as stone, while she worked. The first stroke of foundation felt like paint over a wall, hiding cracks I hadn't noticed until they disappeared. My jawline, once sharp and defiant, softened under her brushes. My brows, trimmed down, reshaped, became something more delicate. When she slid a wig over my cropped hair, the weight of it pressed on me like an iron crown. I wanted to claw it off, to breathe again, but I didn't move. "Look," she said at last, stepping aside. I lifted my eyes to the mirror. A stranger stared back at me. A stranger with my eyes but framed in lashes, shaded in colors I never imagined wearing. I raised a hand to my face and watched her copy me. My reflection was uncanny, alien, and yet disturbingly plausible. "That's not me," I whispered again, but this time the words cracked, thin and powerless. "It doesn't matter what you think," the stylist replied, already packing her kit. "This is who the world will see. That's all that counts." The clothes followed. Dresses at first felt like costumes, fabric brushing my legs in ways that made me flinch. Shoes with narrow toes and unnatural arches made me stumble across the room until the agent barked at me to walk naturally. The humiliation burned hotter than any fear of the men I was running from. Every movement felt borrowed, like I was trespassing in someone else's skin. But the strangest part wasn't the makeup or the clothes or the walk. It was the way the agent looked at me differently once the disguise was complete. Not like a man in hiding anymore, but like a new file in his cabinet. A project finished, a problem solved. And in his eyes, the old me was already gone. That night, lying in a bed too big for just one person, I pressed my face into the pillow and whispered my old name again and again, terrified that if I didn't, I'd forget it by morning. The hardest lesson came not from the mirror, but from the world outside it. The first time I stepped into public as her was a test run, a simple grocery trip designed to measure how well I could pass unnoticed. The agent gave me the list, short and plain, and told me, "Blend in. That's all that matters." Blend in. The phrase echoed in my head like a drumbeat as I walked through the automatic doors, the fluorescent lights spilling down on me. My hands gripped the cat so tightly my knuckles turned pale. I tried to breathe normally, but every inhale felt shaky, shallow, stolen. I expected stares. I expected someone to see straight through the wig, the clothes, the makeup, and point with a laugh. "That's not a woman, that's a fraud." But the strangest thing happened. No one looked twice. A woman pushing a stroller brushed past me without a glance. A teenager stocked shelves and muttered into his phone. A cashier waved someone ahead with practice boredom. The world didn't care. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt invisible in a way that gnawed at me. They weren't seeing me. They were seeing her. Samantha. When I heard the cashier call next, my pulse spiked. My voice, it would betray me. No disguise for that. I thought about just nodding, letting the sound slip past, but the moment cornered me. I forced out a soft hi, and it cracked slightly, too high, too careful. The cashier didn't blink, didn't tilt his head in suspicion. He just scanned the milk and bread, asked if I wanted a bag, and gave me change. I left with the receipt clutched in my hand like proof of something I hadn't yet decided was victory or defeat. Back in the car, the agent was waiting. He glanced at the bags, then at me. No one noticed, did they? I shook my head. My throat felt dry. Good. That means it's working. He said it like success, but to me it sounded like erasure. The better I played this role, the more the old me slipped further into the dark, until maybe one day even I wouldn't remember him. That night, staring at the ceiling, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. If no one else remembers who I was, how long until I stop remembering too? Days blurred into each other, each one stretching like a rehearsal for a play I hadn't auditioned for. The agents insisted on practice, how to talk, how to gesture, even how to smile. "Relax your jaw," one told me. "Lift your voice at the end of a sentence. People will hear confidence in that." Another adjusted the way I crossed my legs, tutting like a stern teacher. At first, I resisted. I laughed bitterly when they told me to study how women carry their purses, as though the angle of a wrist could save my life. But then came the footage. They filmed me walking down a hallway in heels, then played it back. Watching myself stumble, shoulders hunched, hands hanging awkwardly, I realized how jarringly out of place I looked. Not just like a man in disguise, but like someone begging to be noticed. That's when it hit me. The smallest detail could shatter the illusion. And so I stuttered. I mimicked. I absorbed every correction with a mixture of shame and grim determination. At night I collapsed onto the bed, sore-footed, face sore from makeup wipes, my old name circling in my mind like a fading echo. Yet each morning, when I pulled on the clothes, fastened the wig, and caught my reflection, that echo grew fainter. The mirror became my enemy and my judge. I would stare into it, searching for remnants of him. The curve of the jaw that makeup couldn't erase, the line of the neck, the depth in the eyes. But the longer I stared, the more it all seemed to dissolve, replaced by something else. Something softer. Someone unfamiliar but steady. The first time I laughed as her, it startled me. I was sitting in the safe house kitchen, sipping tea, and one of the agents told a joke, dry, bureaucratic humor I wouldn't normally crack a smile at. But I laughed, and the sound that left me wasn't mine. It was higher, lighter. A stranger's laugh. I clapped a hand over my mouth, horrified. The agent only smirked. "See? You're getting the hang of it." But I wasn't getting the hang of it. I was slipping, sliding down a slope where the line between disguise and identity blurred, and no matter how hard I dug my nails in, the ground kept giving way beneath me. That night, I wrote my old name on a scrap of paper, folded it carefully, and hid it under the mattress. A tiny monument to the man who used to exist, in case one day I needed proof he was ever real. The first real test came sooner than I was ready for. They moved me into a small apartment, bare walls, second-hand furniture, and a key that felt heavier than it should have. "You need to live as her now," the agent said. "Not just in practice. This is your life. My life." The words sat in my stomach like lead. Neighbors introduced themselves within the week, polite smiles and casual questions. I stumbled through introductions, my new name sticking to my tongue like something foreign. "Samantha," I'd say, and they'd nod, accepting it without suspicion. That acceptance should have been reassuring, but it unsettled me more. They weren't seeing me, they were seeing only the mask. Work followed. A job carefully arranged, bland enough to avoid drawing attention, receptionist at a medical office. It sounded simple, but walking into that building for the first time felt like stepping on stage before an audience that might boo me off at any second. I kept my voice soft, my posture attentive, repeating my new name until it became automatic. Samantha, Samantha, Samantha. Yet every small interaction gnawed at me. A coworker complimented my blouse, and I muttered thanks, my cheeks heating with an embarrassment I couldn't name. A patient addressed me as Miss Carter, and the words sent a shiver down my spine, equal parts thrill and dread. For the first time, I felt the dangerous tug of belonging, and it terrified me. The most disorienting moment came one afternoon when I caught my reflection in the office window. I wasn't paying attention, just tidying the desk, when I glanced up and saw her, poised, calm, professional. For a fleeting second, I didn't recognize myself at all. My breath hitched, and I had to look away before the room spun. At night, alone in the apartment, I'd whisper my old name like a prayer, clutching that folded piece of paper under the mattress. But each whisper sounded weaker, drowned out by the constant reinforcement of the new one. It wasn't just the world calling me Samantha now, it was me, every day, every hour, every breath. And then, one evening, as I locked up the office, a stranger brushed past me on the street. He didn't stop, didn't linger, but his eyes swept over me with a kind of casual acknowledgement. Not suspicion. Not hostility. Just recognition of me as I appeared. That fleeting glance left me shaken, because in his eyes, there was no trace of him left. Only her. That night, I cried, not because I hated what I was becoming, but because I no longer knew if I wanted to stop it. Weeks turned into months, and with them came the strange rhythm of a life I never asked for. The small apartment filled with traces of her, scarves draped over chairs, shoes lined by the door, mail addressed to Samantha Carter piling up on the counter. Every time I opened the mailbox and saw that name stamped in bold letters, it was like the world insisting, "This is who you are now." And maybe the cruelest part was how quickly people accepted it. My coworkers began inviting me out for coffee, chatting about their weekends, laughing over trivial office gossip. They spoke to me as though I had always been Samantha. They never saw the hesitation behind my smile, never heard the echo of a name I wasn't allowed to speak. But when I was alone, the silence pressed down harder than ever. I'd stand in front of the mirror and study every detail, the eyeliner smudges, the strands of hair falling loose, the curve of my shoulders under a blouse. Sometimes I tried to peel it all away, wipe the makeup, tug at the wig, strip off the clothes. But even stripped bare, I didn't look like him anymore. The habits had changed me. My gestures, my posture, even the way I breathed. The transformation wasn't just surface, it was seeping into my bones. I told myself this was temporary, just survival, just a cover. But then small betrayals began to happen. One morning, a coworker asked, "How are you, Sam?" And without thinking, I smiled at the nickname. Later, when someone held the door open and said, "After you, miss," I didn't flinch. Worse still, I caught myself practicing smiles in the mirror, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet, curious hunger to see which one suited her best. It terrified me, this creeping familiarity. Because beneath the fear, beneath the stubborn grip I kept on my old name, there was an undeniable truth I couldn't shake. Part of me was starting to feel at home in her skin. And then came the phone call. It was late, the apartment dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. When the phone rang, I froze, staring at the glowing screen. The number was blocked. My pulse spiked. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. But finally, I pressed it to my ear. A voice, low and dangerous, hissed through the line. "We know who you are." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My knees buckled, and I crumpled beside it, my breath tearing in ragged gasps. For months, I had played her, lived her, almost believed I was her. But that single sentence yanked me back, reminding me that no disguise, no transformation, could truly erase the danger I was running from. And yet, as I stared at the phone on the floor, trembling, one thought whispered louder than the fear. Did they mean him, or her? The agency moved me the very next morning. I was pulled from the apartment with barely enough time to grab a coat, hustled into an unmarked car while the city outside blurred past. The agent spoke in clipped tones, radios crackling with updates. I sat in the back seat, heart hammering, staring at my reflection in the window. Samantha's face stared back at me, pale and frightened, and for the first time I wondered, was she the one being hunted now, not me? The new safe house was smaller, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where curtains stayed drawn and neighbors kept to themselves. I should have felt safer, but paranoia stuck to me like a second skin. Every knock at the door made me jump. Every shadow outside felt like a watcher. But the strangest part was how the agents treated me. Before, they had spoken to me with a kind of clinical detachment, as if I were just a witness, a liability they had to protect. Now their eyes lingered differently, perhaps unsettled by how convincingly I wore this new identity. One of them slipped, calling me Miss Carter even when the door was shut and no one could hear. When I corrected him, he only shrugged. That's who you are now. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded scrap of paper I had smuggled into my coat pocket during the move. My old name, the last proof of him. I unfolded it slowly, tracing the letters with my fingertip. It felt like touching a gravestone. But the phone call haunted me more than the words on the paper. We know who you are. What if they weren't threatening to expose the man I used to be? What if they had already accepted that he was gone, and were closing in on Samantha instead? The thought left me hollow, because I realized I no longer knew which fate frightened me more, being discovered for who I once was, or being hunted for who I had become. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, dreams tangled me in contradictions. Sometimes I was him, running through alleys with footsteps chasing me. Sometimes I was her, standing under streetlights with eyes watching from the dark. Both dreams ended the same way, with me screaming a name I couldn't remember. In the silence after I woke, drenched in sweat, one truth became undeniable. Somewhere between the lies and the disguises, I had become a ghost of myself, trapped between two identities, uncertain which one the world wanted dead. The days inside the new safe house were suffocating. Windows covered with blinds, movements restricted, every moment monitored. The agents rotated in shifts, their presence constant yet impersonal. I paced the rooms like a caged animal, the walls closing in tighter with every hour. They told me the call might have been a bluff, a scare tactic. But paranoia doesn't listen to logic. My ears strained for every creak in the hallway, every distant car door slamming shut. Fear had a way of sharpening the senses until even silence felt like an ambush. To cope, I found myself practicing her. Not because I wanted to, but because it gave me a sense of control. If I could perfect Samantha, her walk, her voice, her mannerisms, then maybe the mask would be strong enough to protect me. I spent hours in front of the mirror, raising my chin just so, softening the edges of my vowels, adjusting the way my hands moved when I spoke. It was obsessive, almost ritualistic, and yet it calmed me. But something unexpected happened in the process. The more I practiced, the less I had to think about it. Movements that once felt foreign began to flow naturally. I caught myself gesturing without rehearsal, laughing without monitoring the pitch, brushing my hair back with an ease that didn't feel staged. It unsettled me more than any threat outside the door. One evening, while the agent on duty sat in the living room, I lingered in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I studied the reflection with a detached sort of curiosity. Samantha's face stared back, familiar now, almost too familiar. I tilted my head, touched my cheek, whispered both names, one after the other. The old one sounded strange, like a word in a foreign language I hadn't spoken in years. Samantha, though, it rolled off my tongue effortlessly. I pressed my palms to the counter, leaning closer to the glass. Who are you? I asked the reflection. No answer came, just the echo of my own voice, lighter now, softened by months of use. That night, I didn't take the paper from its hiding place. For the first time, I left it untouched, as though I were afraid to be reminded of the man fading further from memory. And then, in the stillness of that safe house, a thought crept in that chilled me more than any threat could. Maybe they weren't turning me into her. Maybe I was doing it to myself. The safe house began to feel less like protection and more like purgatory. Days slipped by with little variation. The hum of the refrigerator, the muted shuffle of agents swapping shifts, the relentless silence pressing against my skull. I told myself I was enduring it for survival, but beneath that justification, something else was growing, a dangerous familiarity with my new skin. When the agency finally allowed me to venture out again, it felt like being released from captivity. They gave strict instructions, casual errands only, no unnecessary risks. I stepped onto the street with a scarf wrapped around my neck and sunglasses shielding my eyes, though the disguise was almost redundant. Nobody looked twice. In fact, people smiled at me. A cashier complimented my earrings, a passerby nodded courteously as he held the door. It was subtle, unremarkable, and yet it shook me. I had once been invisible in a different way, just another man blending into the background. But this was something else entirely. They saw her. They interacted with her. And I realized, with a jolt, that I hadn't just learned how to play Samantha, I had become someone others instinctively recognized as real. But recognition came with a new kind of fear. Because if strangers could so easily accept me as her, then how far had I drifted from him? That night, restless, I pulled the folded paper from under the mattress. My old name glared back at me, sharp and certain. I whispered it aloud, but the sound faltered. It no longer carried the weight it once had. Instead, it felt brittle, like a relic from a life that belonged to someone else entirely. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I let it go. If I stopped whispering it like a secret prayer. If I allowed Samantha to be more than a disguise. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with a strange, quiet relief, like loosening a knot that had cut too deep for too long. Still, the danger outside hadn't vanished. Late one evening, as I walked back from the corner store, I caught a shadow following me a beat too long. My stomach dropped. I quickened my pace, heart thundering, ears straining for footsteps. When I finally slipped into the safety of the apartment, my hands were shaking too badly to lock the door at first. I pressed my back against the wall, breath ragged. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe it had been someone out for a walk. But deep inside, I knew it was only a matter of time before the past clawed its way to my doorstep. And when it did, I no longer knew which name, his or hers, they'd come looking for. The shadow didn't leave me after that night. It lived in my head, perched on my shoulder, whispering that every laugh behind me was about me, every stranger's glance a recognition, every car door a threat. Even the agents began to notice my nerves fraying. One of them, Miller, the only one who sometimes softened his voice, left a mug of tea at my elbow and said, "You're doing better than you think." Better than I think. The phrase clung to me as I stared at the steam rising from the cup. How do you measure better when you don't even know who you are anymore? I started writing in a notebook, not a diary, just words spilling out in uneven lines. Fragments of my old life, my childhood street, my father's voice, the smell of rain on my first apartment's windowsill. I wrote them as though I were trying to archive a language before it went extinct. But sometimes my hand drifted, sketching things that belonged to her, the curve of her signature, the tilt of her smile. Pages of two people who were supposed to be one but felt like strangers living in my skin. It was on one of those nights, bent over the notebook, that Miller said quietly from the doorway, "You're not the first to lose yourself." I looked up, startled. He rarely lingered. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, eyes downcast. "People think a new name is just a mask. But live under it long enough and it stops being a disguise. It becomes a room you can't leave." His words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to ask if there was a way out, but I already knew the answer. Safety had always come at a price. The next morning, when I dressed for another sanctioned errand, I caught myself humming, softly, unconsciously. It was a tune I didn't recognize. When I glanced in the mirror, Samantha's reflection was there, humming back. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an impersonation. It felt like a moment of calm. But calm never lasted long. A letter arrived at the safe house that afternoon, slipped under the door without a sound. My name on the envelope, not the old one. The new one. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant. Inside was a single line, "Stop running, Samantha. We've already found you." The paper trembled in my hands. They weren't calling me by his name anymore. They were calling me by hers. The letter changed everything. It wasn't just a threat, it was proof. Proof that whoever was after me had pierced through the layers of protection, the relocations, the constant disguises. They didn't just know where I was. They knew who I was, or at least, who I had become. The agents reacted immediately, tightened surveillance, new codes, stricter rules. But no amount of locked doors or watchful eyes could erase the words carved into my memory. Stop running, Samantha. They hadn't called me by the old name. That was what unsettled me most. If they wanted to strike fear, wouldn't they have used it? Wouldn't they have reached back into my past and ripped that identity wide open? But no. They addressed me as Samantha. They weren't hunting the man I had been. They were hunting the woman I had become. That realization unraveled me in ways I didn't expect. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread before me, and whispered both names into the silence. The first felt brittle, dry, foreign. The second slipped out like water, fluid and natural. The more I whispered it, the more it sounded like the truth. But truth was a dangerous thing. That night, I dreamed again. Only this time, the roles had reversed. I wasn't being chased as him. I was standing in the streetlight as her, calm, waiting, while faceless shadows circled. And instead of running, I lifted my chin and whispered, I am Samantha. The dream ended there, but the echo lingered when I woke, sending a shiver through me that wasn't entirely fear. The agents warned me to stay vigilant, but inside, another battle was raging. If the people after me only recognized her, then what did that mean for him? Had he already disappeared so completely that even my enemies had forgotten him? I unfolded the scrap of paper from under the mattress, the one with his name. I stared at it for a long time, the ink faded from my constant handling. And then, with hands that trembled, I tore it down the middle. The sound was small, almost delicate, but it felt like thunder. I sat there with the torn halves in my lap, breathing heavily, as though I had just committed an irreversible act. Because in a way, I had. The proof of him was gone. All that was left was her. And as terrifying as that should have been, part of me felt something else rising beneath the fear, a strange, dangerous sense of release. After the letter, life became a paradox. I was never more terrified, yet never more certain of who I was becoming. Every precaution grew heavier. The locked doors, the coded calls, the armed agents hovering nearby. But when I caught my reflection in the mirror, or heard someone address me as Samantha, I didn't flinch anymore. I responded without hesitation, without thought. The agents noticed. One evening, Miller handed me a fresh set of IDs, passport, driver's license, credit cards, all under the name Samantha Lee Carter. I turned them over in my hands, the weight of the plastic and laminated paper like bricks on my chest. This is permanent now, isn't it? I asked. Miller hesitated. His silence was the answer. I spent hours staring at those IDs. There was no trace of my old self in them. No photograph of the man who had once existed. No letters spelling his name. Just Samantha. As if the government, the world, and even my enemies had conspired to erase him entirely. At first, I resisted the finality of it. But then I thought of the torn paper under the mattress, gone forever. I thought of the strangers who never looked twice, the coworkers who saw me as nothing but her. And slowly, unbearably, the truth sank in. Maybe he had been erased long before the IDs arrived. The following week, the agency staged another test. They wanted me to attend a social gathering under surveillance, to gauge how convincingly I could blend. It was just a neighborhood book club, unassuming and harmless. I almost laughed at the absurdity, me, in a book club. But I went. Sitting there, listening to women debate a novel, sipping tea from a porcelain cup, I felt the strangest thing, ease. The laughter, the casual rhythm of conversation, the way they accepted me without suspicion. It wrapped around me like a warm coat. I even chimed in once, and the sound of my own voice startled me. It wasn't forced. It wasn't calculated. It was natural. Walking home afterward, I realized with a jolt that I hadn't thought of him once during that meeting. Not once. For an entire evening, he hadn't existed. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with a mixture of grief and relief. The enemies were closing in, yes. Danger was real, yes. But the bigger danger was inside me, the realization that losing him no longer felt like a tragedy. It felt like inevitability. The inevitability became harder to ignore with each passing day. The more I lived as Samantha, the more distant he felt, like a dream fading in daylight. Memories of him came in fragments now. The roughness of his voice, the weight of his stride, the sharpness of his jaw in the mirror. They appeared like ghosts, and then slipped away before I could grasp them. The agents still drilled me on safety protocols, escape routes, coded words, what to do if contact was made. But even as I recited them, I wondered, if someone cornered me and demanded my identity, which name would I give? Which truth would tumble from my mouth without hesitation? The answer terrified me, because I already knew. Another letter arrived. This time, slid under the door in the dead of night. No envelope, no pretense. Just a single sheet with 4 words written in bold strokes. You can't hide forever. But again, the name was the same. Samantha. Always Samantha. It was as though my pursuers had rewritten me just as thoroughly as the agency had. They weren't threatening the man who once existed. They were hunting the woman standing here now. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My hands shook, but not from fear alone. Something else pulsed beneath it, steady and undeniable. Defiance. If they came for Samantha, then maybe it was Samantha who would face them. I walked to the bathroom, flicked on the harsh overhead light, and studied myself in the mirror. No wig this time, no makeup. Just me. Yet when I tilted my head and whispered my old name, it sounded foreign, hollow. When I whispered Samantha, the reflection met my gaze without hesitation. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was lying. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was changing. I had changed. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. But as soon as that thought surfaced, another followed like a shadow. If the old me was gone, what would be left for them to destroy when they finally found me? The final weeks before everything came to a head felt like walking a tightrope strung over a canyon. On one side was the life I'd left behind, on the other the one I'd stepped into. And below, nothing but the void of not knowing who I truly was anymore. The agents were on high alert. They changed my schedule daily, rotated safe houses, rehearsed emergency escapes. But no matter how much they tried to manage the outside threat, the bigger battle was inside me. The man I'd been wasn't just fading, he was gone. When I closed my eyes, I couldn't picture his face clearly anymore. My own memory had become unreliable. It was Miller who finally said what I couldn't. One night as we sat in the dim kitchen, he watched me fidget with my tea and said quietly, "You're not pretending anymore, are you?" The words landed like a stone in water. I stared at him, heart pounding. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know who I am now." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time to decide." Decide. The word frightened me. But it also felt like a lifeline. Like maybe, for the first time, I had a say in what happened next. That evening, after the agents retired to their posts, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself for a long, unbroken moment. No makeup, hair loose, eyes hollow but steady. And then I whispered the old name. Nothing. No flicker of recognition. No surge of belonging. I whispered Samantha and the sound anchored me, solid and clear. I realized then that the transformation wasn't something the agency had done to me. It was something I had done to myself, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the disguise became the skin, and the skin became me. So when the next letter arrived, slipped under the door at dawn, I didn't tremble as I opened it. This one had no threats, no commands, just a single line, written in the same elegant hand. "We're closer than you think." I folded the letter, set it aside, and stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't see a fugitive. I didn't see a man pretending to be a woman. I saw Samantha, steady, frightened, but standing. For the first time, the fear didn't feel bigger than me. The morning after the last letter, I woke with a strange calm. Not safety, never safety, but clarity. The agents were tense, radios buzzing, their eyes flicking to every window and door. I moved through the motions with a steadiness that surprised even me. When I passed the mirror in the hallway, I didn't stop to question the reflection. It was her. It was me. There was no longer a gap between those truths. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the walls, Miller handed me a small black bag. Inside were essentials, cash, IDs, a burner phone. "If they get too close," he said, "you run." I nodded, but the word felt different now. Run. I had been running for so long. From danger, from the past, from myself. And yet the person who had started running wasn't here anymore. The knock came just after midnight. Soft, deliberate. The agent sprang into action, weapons drawn, Signals exchanged. My heart thundered, but not with the same frantic fear as before. I stood in the center of the room, clutching the bag, and felt the weight of every choice, every transformation, pressing down and lifting me up at once. "Stay back," one agent hissed. But I couldn't. I walked closer to the door, my hand brushing the cool wood, my breath steady. Whoever was on the other side, they weren't looking for him. They had written letters, spoken words, called out only one name. Samantha. And that was who they would find. The door creaked, the night air spilled in, and in that suspended moment between danger and revelation, I realized something with unshakable certainty. Even if they came to destroy me, they could never take me back to who I was. That person no longer existed. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't pretending. I was Samantha. And whatever came next, I would face it as her.